Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's also an honor to enjoy Russian hospitality. I think we all can give also our Russian host another round of applause because it's impressive what they brought to us yesterday and the other days. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of our session is basically, could be pictured in a triangle fashion. We have the challenge to balance innovation, consumer protection, and financial stability, financial integrity. These two different topics are very, very hard to bring into an equilibrium. But if we do not bring it in the equilibrium, it wouldn't work. Although innovation sounds great, everyone who's in charge and who needs to think long-term knows that it's extremely difficult to know whether an innovation is always good or bad. We know that there are certain innovations which are extremely harmful to societies. We do not have to think about weapons of mass destruction, but by the time, of course, when those were invented, they were innovations, all right? So when you start thinking about innovation, you see that innovation has good sides and upsides. It is the topic of our panel to speak about how we can create this equilibrium through legal means, through supervisory means, and altogether achieve basically a balance that is fruitful for our societies and make sure that our economies prosper. We had yesterday a Dutch saying about trust, that trust comes on foot and leaves on horseback. When it comes to balancing the three things of innovation, client protection, and integrity stability, I want to introduce another proverb, this time from Germany, which is, regulators need to shower without getting wet. And I think this is a good start of, can I please hear your theme-setting presentation, Romario?
Good morning to everyone, colleagues, governors, deputy governors, and above all, I would like to express our gratitude on behalf of the Bank of Mozambique to our Russian host for their warm hospitality, for all the organizations, for all the preparations, and as witnessed last night. So we had a great event where we had a lot of fun. And second, I would like to also congratulate AFI for the 10th anniversary. It's clearly a milestone of excellence, of achieving the network, which is an important global network for financial inclusion and digital financial services issues. Now, as I was asked to be the theme setter for this panel, I had to think a little bit, behind how do I deal with it. And I'm quite happy that our panelist here, Professor, was real put. He said, well, innovation can be dangerous. So the question, what type of innovation will? So I said, well, I need to reflect a little bit about that so that we can put our presentation in perspective. I said, well, let's go back to the basics first. And that's what I'm going to spend just a few minutes going back to the basics, a couple of minutes, no more, and then I move on to our experience in Mozambique, so you can put that in context. Basics means what? At the end of the day, all of us, poor countries, rich countries, we have been lately concerned about growth. But not just growth for any type of growth, but we want growth that is broad-based and sometimes we call inclusive. That set the stage because that's what we want. And then as we reflect, there are many pillars of inclusive growth. Among those pillars for inclusive growth, we have financial inclusion as a critical ingredient. But then we said, wait a minute, financial inclusion is the main pillar to achieving inclusive growth. And if we are going to do that, we can get help from technology, from innovation, to help us speed up the process. So that puts an anchor. We need innovation, we need technology to help us achieve financial inclusion, which is an important pillar and ingredient of inclusive and broad-based both. So that set the parameters of what type of innovation, what type of technology that we want, that we welcome, as regulators, as central banks, especially in areas where the regulations are outlined, are at the central bank. Where is the, how do I put this? Supposed to have some slides, just quickly. I'm sorry? Okay, but that's fine. If they're not there, I don't know. I was supposed to have something, but it's okay if you don't have. I'm supposed to be here or what? Okay, that's fine. Okay, good, thank you. I don't see anything. Nothing is moving, but it's okay. Forget about the slides then. They're there on the other side. Okay, okay. Okay. So that's basically the foundation, how we anchor this presentation. So then we realize as we promote financial inclusion, we have issues of financial stability as well outlined. We have issues of financial integrity. What they really mean, those issues, so we can understand the type of equilibrium that we mean, that we want as policymakers. Financial integrity means issues of consumer protection, behaviors of credit institutions. We have issues of AML, which is anti-money laundering, financing of terrorism. That's basically what it means in few words, simplifying. Financial stability issues, the issues have to do with the health, soundness of key financial institutions. And we all know what happened when banks, credit institutions fail in our jurisdiction, the problem they raise in confidence. And we have standard setters for these types of issues, for financial integrity issues and for financial stability issues. They call FSB, the Financial Stability Board, based in Basel, and then we also have the FATF for financing, and there are clear standards about what you can do and what you can do. You comply, you don't comply. And if you don't comply, there are consequences to you as a country, to the institution as such. When we get into financial inclusion issues, which are critically important to achieve inclusive growth, then we find ourselves this innovation which creates risks to stability, to integrity, but we don't have standard setters. There are no agreed common practice to look after. We only have experience, country experience. So when we want to do something on financial inclusion, we try to find out what our other countries are doing, because we don't have. Go to Kenya, go to Tanzania, go to Philippines, and so on. That's basically what it is. So as we move in that arena of moving into financial inclusion using technology, we may find ourselves being penalized or maybe even helped by technology, because it may end up creating problems to standard setters, whether the FSB, based in Basel, or on the financial integrity issue. So that's pretty much where we are in broad terms. Where are we in Mozambique? I think that's what you would like to hear from me in this broad context. If you look at this, let me quickly, this is very important. Financial innovation can take place in all these ecosystems, where there's cryptocurrency, biometric, financial inclusion, e-money, FinTech, sandbox, and blockchain, and you name it. So all of this is relevant. Financial innovation can take place. We in Mozambique, we are focusing basically on a sandbox for FinTechs. That's where we are, and that's the experience that I'm going to talk about. It was launched in May of this year, and we had help. We had help from the FSD, which is the Financial System Deepening, which is funded mainly by DFID, by the Swedish are also there, and the Dutch are also behind it. We got help because we are moving into a new terrain. Help in selecting the startups. Help
in funding the startups. So that made our life very easy because we don't have regulation, we don't have experience, and they're there in Mozambique. So it was easy for us to move it. So we had to provide the building, central bank, to bring these youngsters to the central bank, a very formal environment, as you can imagine the challenge of how you get these youngsters in their 20s or even younger to come and work at the central bank. We had to create the conditions for that. So they can come anytime pretty much over 24 hours, informally. They can sleep there to that point. We create the conditions to basically live at the central bank, literally, for them so they can innovate in an informal way. To do that, we had to create a separate building, separate entrance, separate conditions for them. So that's the kind of things here. Now, the lab, and you say, what they are doing it? The eligibility criteria was defined by the partners, FSD in particular. And we work with them in defining the eligibility criteria. So let me get to, so you can see a little bit where, what is eligibility criteria? Yes. That's eligibility criteria that was defined jointly with the partners. On the basis of that eligibility criteria, it has to be genuine innovation, has to benefit customers, has to have advantage of this. So it was not just anybody. We selected, basically FSD selected 5 startups, which are there now, working and trying to innovate, mainly focusing in the area of transfer domestically, transfer to the most remote part of the country. So they're developing platforms to make sure that funds, money can be transferred to the most remote parts of the country. The landscape in Mozambique, to understand the importance, is that we are quite behind in terms of financial inclusion. Only about 35% of our population is covered by the formal banking system. And only 40% of our adult population has e-money accounts. So we have a lot to be doing that. So we need access, we need usage, and then part of that process, that's why we are bringing all these FinTechs that are helping us, hopefully. How long they are going to be? They have been approved to operate. They need to develop their products within a 6-month period, which is renewable. It's a standard one. So that's what it is. Now, I will say, as we move to finalize, because I see my time is up, let me go to the challenge. We have seen the benefits, which I elaborated very quickly. I don't need to go into the details, but they're quite challenged. What you have there, they're pretty much all the challenge related to regulators when they get involved into financial innovation issues. But then you ask me, where are we in Mozambique? For us, the main challenge in our FinTechs, in our labs there, are mainly on AML issue and staff capacity and confidentiality, which basically means personal data protections. And then I will close this section and ask my colleagues here, they can maybe assist us, how do we deal with these issues, AML issues, as we evolve, as we try to reach the most disadvantaged people, the unbanked, which is the majority of our population, nearly 2/3. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Rogerio, for this very insightful and we all feel it, heartful presentation. Anatoly, you are in charge of legislation every day. How do you balance these 3 topics of innovation, financial stability, consumer protection, with a special view to financial inclusion in Russia?
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you to use equipment for translate my speech because my English is not well.
So, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this forum for inviting me here and for providing me with this protection against the rain in the street. Well, it's the showers. They have given me a raincoat, and thanks to this raincoat, I'm here, dry and intact. And I hope that the Bank of Russia, and with the help of the State Duma of my fellow MPs, will sort of provide our consumers of financial services with sort of metaphoric raincoats in the rain of innovations that storm in our financial markets. Russia has a few advantages that allow us to develop this area rapidly. First of all, we're under sanctions, yes, and sanctions sort of give us impetus to think faster and more intense manner. They make us think, so we keep new ideas keep coming, and we believe that they will help us overcome any sanctions that we are under. And digital technology is one of the areas in the financial sphere. I think digital technology will help us overcome, and they will help us showcase that the sanctions are absolutely ineffective. Our second advantage is to do with our staff, with our human resources. Americans keep on talking about how good Russian hackers are, and claiming that they even intervened in the US elections. Well, if we have brains like those, well, why not use it for actually developing the most cutting-edge digital technology and for the benefit of our economy? We have the Digital Economy Program, which has been launched and it's in full swing. And last year we adopted a law on using biometric data for remote identification, and generally, well, starting with the second half of this year, well, you can be lying on the beach in Sochi and get all financial services you need, well, provided that you upload your biometric data to the single biometrical system. Right now we're working on law which would establish the financial marketplace. At first stage we only allowed biometrics for credit products, for banks, but obviously well, in the short term this technology will be adopted by all financial sectors, and many citizens will be able to get their financial services from Sochi, Luxembourg, from Mozambique. Well, provided they they work with Russian financial institutions, because this technology will allow them to get these services. Then let's move on for instant payment services, which would also allow us to conduct all settlements instantly, very fast, and this would allow for establishment of new institutions which would provide the related financial services. We are about to adopt several laws which would regulate, well, the cryptocurrencies industry, the so-called investment crowdfunding platforms, and I think next month these laws will be adopted, and these platforms will allow us to connect the initiators of projects with investors, and very fast, without any unnecessary regulations on the part of the Bank of Russia, which we believe would really help quite many project initiators who work with digital technology, maybe some other kinds of projects, to get their funding faster and without excessive regulations, which in turn would boost the economy. We want to allow the use of blockchain. We generally basically open our doors for the crypto industry, sort of, but still, we should keep in mind that the cryptocurrencies should be regulated by the Bank of Russia. So the keys to cryptocurrencies will be provided by the Bank of Russia, and we'll keep on exploring this technology. We'll look into it using the sandbox, and then probably the door will be gradually opened wider and wider. And I think that our legal frameworks will really help the development of digital technology or any other big data related data, automation technology. Well, and so we hope that they will contribute to this hopefully explosive growth of this technology. And still, we should keep in mind all the related risks. And therefore, we adopt relevant laws like, for instance, our experienced hackers, they have exploited that we had a very liberal law on small sums being transferred off the accounts, like they would steal at $10 or $20 of an account, and since these figures were so small, the liability was very liberal, and the law enforcement agencies could not intervene. Then we changed the law to make sure that any money being stolen is a serious crime, and therefore our law enforcement agencies were authorized to do some preemptive actions to stop such theft. Our moderator sort of gives me signs that I should probably wrap up. Oh, I could have talked on about this forever. If you want to talk about it, like, ask me, I'll tell about this. In general, okay, good luck, all the best to your forum, and always stay dry in however hard the rain is, including tropical storms. Thank you. Thank you.
Thunderstorm this morning, I know that Russian raincoats will better be good manufactured, otherwise they won't well. Yeah? So in this way, the metaphorical raincoat is basically something that we should keep in our mind if we deal with innovation. So Pia, you are facing these challenges basically every day. Do you think that how can you balance actually these triangle of innovation, consumer protection, financial integrity, financial instability?
Thank you for that question. First of all, let me join also the other panelists in thanking our hosts for this 10th AFI GPF. Everyone was talking about the gala last night. I think it's another testament to the community that AFI has become over the in the last 10 years. So thank you to the Central Bank of Russia. The question that you raise is a difficult one, just as difficult as the proverb that you started this panel with, that we need to shower without getting wet. As regulators, because definitely creating the balance is a very difficult task, and it will require really a careful understanding of what we are looking at. So in the face of innovations, I think the Bangko Sentral has always been creating that environment of openness to innovation, recognizing the benefits that it can bring to the financial system for financial inclusion in particular. And in this respect, we've adopted what has been called the test and learn approach. I think in the panel we will be talking about regulatory sandboxes, what are the differences, but I would like to depart from talking about the mechanisms themselves and what's better and what's not, but really just focusing on the objective of why we do this is really to understand the models and the risks associated with these innovations. And in understanding these risks, this is really the only way wherein you can see how you can balance the different policy objectives. And it is a deliberate process. And in the BSP, we have also been espousing the ICIP framework, which is inclusion, stability, integrity, and protection, in looking at complementarities in promoting these objectives, at the same time minimizing possible, consequences that could be avoided. And having a very clear framework will make you more cognizant of the possible risks and really laying out, very, very deliberately what could happen with these innovations. And that can only be properly undertaken with a full understanding of the risks, which you cannot do if you are not open to dialogue, to really understanding business models. And in fact, aside from ICIP, with all these kinds of innovations, even competition issues should be considered. So it's that general openness, also the very deliberate desire to understand the risks, and then looking at how they could be balanced and addressed in a either through regulation, existing regulation, or if there's new regulations that have to be in place. And to add to that, aside from that framework and openness, I think the fundamental, discussions that we've been having here in AFI about proportionality and, making these regulations principles-based, so that in the face of innovation, we can never really anticipate how these products, services, models will evolve, to really see how our principles-based regulations could address the fundamental risks that could be applied to many, or that could be seen in many models that we are seeing and will be seeing in the market.
Thank you, Pia. Artem, what does the Central Bank of Russia do in order to unlock the potential of FinTech? Or in other words, how is the raincoat of the CBR tailored?
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm very happy that here our forum is taking place. And without breaking the tradition of all the speakers, I would like to say thank you to all our guests this time, because even if the organizers and the central bank did everything right and you didn't come, then this event wouldn't take place. Thank you very much for finding the possibility to come. And right now we are quite actively working. So coming back to the issue, the Bank of Russia is looking into innovative technology, and we deem them very prospective, and we take a lot of measures for those technologies to evolve. As an example, Mr. Aksakov said the single biometric platform is the task that has been solved together with the banking community, and is the foundation for FinTech in order to develop this work stream quite actively. This was the first milestone of a really developed, realized project. We have several more projects. Yesterday and today we've mentioned it, and I would like to mention them again. Those are the marketplace. It's an innovation in using banking services, and of course it's the technology that have to do with fast payments. It changes the landscape of the remittances in the Russian Federation, and the main goal is to make those remittances in each place in our country. And our country is very big, and sometimes in places where people live, they don't have some financial institutions, but they don't even have post offices. But there is mobile network, and it gives us a possibility to organize the financial inclusion. What would I like to focus on? Yesterday there was a point mentioned that financial technology drops the intermediary between the financial institution and the customer. I'm ready not to agree with this. It's the other it's the other sense that between those parties there is another party arising that realizes that financial technology. Take the example of marketplace. This is some platform that gives the opportunity to provide financial services. What does it lead to? Leads to another situation in terms of security, and as it was very justly said, the foundation is the trust, and the trust can come, but if something happens, it will ride on a horseback much faster. And in these conditions, the central bank has to provide trust, ensure trust to financial services provided not only by the financial institutions, but some intermediary platforms, some technology that realizes, accomplishes some tasks to provide the tasks. In this regard, the Central Bank of Russia has launched and has published and is preparing more strict requirements and regulations in terms of information security of those technologies. Yes? As a regulator, we cannot influence technological companies. It's not our sphere of competence, not our task, but we can find technology companies, we can influence them via financial organizations. For example, we have the recommendation in the field of standardization. It's a list of the best practices, how to realize financial technologies, where we directly say how that the security should be in each technology. We say that realization of each technology should be security by design, and it's the main issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Security by design is, of course, a very important word, because it means you need to think ahead before the problems start. Security by design implies a lot of planning on the side of regulators to make this possible, because we all know that the key issue of innovation is that we do not know what will be innovation look like in 1, 2, 3 years from now. So security by design is a very, very important word, because it means you need to have safeguards, and at the same time you need to have a sufficient level of transparency and openness. And this brings me to you, Philip. You did some research into the different structural approaches to balance in our three priorities, and as a former member of the FCA, of course, you've been, let's say, a victim of the first sandbox approaches, and maybe you can tell us a little bit how your fingers got burned, and at the same time, what are the different approaches to innovation in the world? Thank you.
Thanks, Dirk. Yeah, it's a tricky question, this one of balancing innovation with the more traditional regulatory objectives of protecting consumers, maintaining financial stability, and obviously financial integrity as well. And the FCA 4 or 5 years ago in the UK was one of the first regulators to really look at this question of FinTech and innovation and what it meant for the UK regulatory authorities, both in terms of embracing the positives which FinTech can have, including for financial inclusion, of course, but also the potential risks and challenges that that might engender. And I think we've learned quite a lot in the UK, and it's great that we have forums like this where lessons learned and good practices can be shared. Maybe I'll share just 3 or 4 takeaways from some of the work that we've been doing at Cambridge, both looking at the UK and other countries around the world. So the first, I think, goes to the point that Pia made very well about the importance of engagement and dialogue. We've seen this be mutually beneficial for both the innovators and the regulators. So on the innovator side, what we've often seen that through all of these initiatives, whether it be a sandbox or an innovation hub or a RegTech accelerator, what fintechs and innovators are looking for is a degree of regulatory certainty. They're often struggling to understand how they as a company fit into the regulatory environment. And these initiatives have been very beneficial in reducing the uncertainty of the regulatory environment as it applies to them, which in turn promotes more products and services coming to market more quickly, and of course that is beneficial for financial inclusion as well. For the regulators, I think the dialogue has been even more beneficial. I think it's helped them understand the different risks that FinTech might entail, but also just understand the emerging trends and what's going on in the market, and that in turn helps inform regulation. So we've seen many countries around the world now establish sandboxes and use the learnings from those sandboxes to inform their own approaches to regulation. So to take one example, the central bank in Malaysia put in place a sandbox about a year or two ago, and one of the companies testing in that was using eKYC, so electronic identification of consumers, which wasn't previously possible in Malaysia. And the regulator wanted to understand whether this was possible, what the risks were, what the opportunities were. And based on that sandbox test, has put in place a new eKYC regime. So I think a really good example of something which benefits both the regulators in terms of promoting and developing their own regulatory approach, but also the innovators who, as a result of the test in the sandbox, can now undertake eKYC in Malaysia. The second thing I want to talk about very briefly is culture. I think sometimes this is the elephant in the room, in that we're asking regulators to move from, and I can say this as a former regulator, what is traditionally quite a conservative, risk-averse approach. Regulators are not known for sort of taking risks and doing things differently, and I think the advent of FinTech and financial innovation puts new expectations and pressures on a regulator to do things a little bit differently, to move from stopping bad things happening to enabling good things happening. So I think that's a key component of this. And the final thing, and I think this is what Rogerio touched on as well, is capacity. And this new balance of promoting financial innovation with financial stability and consumer protection requires a new skill set of the regulators, which is something for us all to think about and learn from today. So 3 very quick takeaways, I think, on what we've seen from around the world.
Anatoly, of course, we heard that the Russian legislator is very proactive in its approaches. And what do you think are the key priorities in addressing financial integrity, financial stability when dealing with innovations?
To my mind, any innovation and any solution should be aimed at protection of customers, including financial institutions. Giving space and freedom for any technology in our market, we first of all should see who will be the customer of this technology, the consumer. So there should be certain rules for the investment platforms, for financial institutions who use this technology to provide financial service. Usefulness, cheapness, this is all in place, but as for security of protection of a customer, especially unqualified investor, that is what should be the priority of any solution. If we provide this insurance with our legislation, with our legal regulations, then the trust will be high for these technologies, and then they will be realized a lot faster, and there will be no disappointment, neither with the citizens nor with the regulator and business. I would answer with this short way.
So you enhanced the need to protect, in particular, unqualified investors, which is very much in line with the expectation of financial law. Rogerio, you have a sandbox regime also in Mozambique, and could you explain a bit how you emphasize the financial integrity, financial stability aspects of your system?
I think there's something that I need to stress so you see how it's. We have a context there. Still in Mozambique now, we have a banking law. Any type of financial institution, any institution providing financial service, whatever you call it, it needs to be covered by the banking law. So it's a very, very traditional system. So
You need to have a license. If you don't have a license, you have to operate it under the umbrella of somebody who has a license. And that has created problems because some of these startups, we had some very great ideas, they find themselves barred by the regulator, in our case, Bank of Mozambique, because they say, are you a bank? Are you a credit institution? Do you have a license? If you know, you need to ask for help of some godfather bank who can cover for you. And in that process, what happened? Some of them, they approached some of these institutions, and they didn't get much cooperation. When then they have to open up and reveal their technology to the traditional bank, suddenly they see their product is now being used by the existing institution without recognition. That, of course, is creating lawsuits, friction, and so on. So you say, how do we deal with that as a regulator? We are in the process of amending our banking law to allow all these institutions that innovate, that provide new players to operate without the umbrella of a banking license to allow it to happen. It's well advanced. We are hoping quite soon to be able to submit a draft to Parliament for discussion. So we have, again, got help from partners, from countries, and so on, how we get that modern banking law. In the meantime, you say, what are we doing now in this transition? As you know, it takes some time to get the laws approved. We have even our own frictions within the central bank because there are people more traditional say, you can't do anything until you have the banking law approved, because otherwise you're in a gray area. If not, they can even do more. You are in an illegal world, dark world. And you as a regulator, you don't want to be that. So that's the kind of tension that we are. In the meantime, we move to a sandbox environment with understanding that while we are waiting for the regulation, for the new law to be approved, we'll be able to operate and allow them on a case-by-case basis to allow them to operate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rogerio. Pia, you are dealing with particular challenges in the field of cryptocurrencies. And how do you balance, basically, in particular, the financial integrity aspect with regard to cryptocurrencies?
Okay, on that particular issue, I'll go back to how I explained how we approach innovation, because this is one good example. When we saw virtual currencies in the market, what we really did was we did engage the players to really see the volumes. We tried to see what was happening in the market, and realized at that point, and this was maybe about four years ago, that there was not yet enough scope for us to already put in place regulation. It was a time where if we had put out something, it might not be as responsive to the development of the industry. At the same time, we did not know enough, and the volumes did not prompt us to issue regulations right away. So what we did in 2014 was to issue consumer advisories to inform the public, that there are some benefits to using virtual currencies in terms of really more efficient way to basically for payments and remittances, and it could affect remittances, which is very important to a country like the Philippines. However, there are risks, and you are not protected. It's not regulated by the BSP. And 4 years down the road, we issued this in 2014. We continued this engagement, continued the surveillance, and we did issue regulation in 2017 in regulating the point wherein these virtual currencies interface with fiat currency. And this is our regulation on virtual currency exchanges, primarily to address the AML, the financial integrity issues. As registered virtual currency exchanges, they are now regulated by the BSP and are required to do all the requirements under the AML in terms of know your customer and customer due diligence, reporting, and all of those responsibilities, as well as consumer protection and technology risk management. So that is how they have been brought into the regulated space to address that issue. However, now we are really seeing, how business models are evolving, and we are constantly also engaging and looking at how whether our current regulations would need to be enhanced or would need to be adjusted. So it is a journey, and as I mentioned, understanding the risks so that we don't box in these innovations in rules-based or in fixed regulation, but having enough flexibility so that the financial institutions that we regulate can manage these risks, particularly AML, CFT risks.
Thank you. Artem, the Russian central bank has a particular approach to using blockchain for enhancing integrity and stability, I learned, and at the same time opening it up for innovation. Would you like to explore, share a bit your experiences with the audience?
That's true. The Bank of Russia has a few promising blockchain-based projects, and essentially I'm talking about exchanging information on banking guarantees, exchange information on mortgages, and similar ways to use this technology. We can safely say that in the light of all of the specifics of the financial institutions and with a view to financial stability, this is a very good experience which allows us to provide access to such documents very fast. And still we believe that the use of cryptocurrencies as of now is a very high risk task. I think this has been mentioned by my colleague from State Duma, that there is work on several federal laws which aim to establish the regulatory role within which we can work with the digital assets. So in this situation, we generally we like to refer to proverbs. I'll also refer to Russian proverb. People think about things they worry about, so bold people talk about comms. So as a security guy, I talk about security, and distributed ledger technology is also very risky. It entails big risks in terms of information security, and so risks of compromising confidentiality when transacting with network participants. Well, we all understand why these risks matter. The second problem is the issue of the infrastructure not being inadequate to the new distributed ledger technology. All of the known identified security incidents, including cryptocurrency theft, show us that there was inadequate attention to infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Philip, what are, from an international perspective, the different approaches to enhance integrity in the pro-innovative systems, sandboxes, and so on?
So it's a good question about sandboxes. We see lots of different sandboxes around the world targeted at doing different things. So a number of regulators have tied their sandbox initiatives to explicitly promoting financial inclusion. And that obviously entails not just innovation, but also continuing to protect consumers and promote financial integrity as well. We see other sandboxes which are aimed at the regulator understanding FinTech a little bit more. It's not necessarily about promoting the market development, although in many cases it is as well. But they're simply seeking to understand where new developments in technology push up against the existing policy and regulatory environment. So if you look at the case of Singapore, for example, they're very explicitly trying to identify where there are tensions between what the companies want to provide and the existing regulatory environment. So the companies have to demonstrate to them that the existing rule or regulation is not fit for purpose. And I think that's an interesting way of doing things. It's definitely a novel way of doing things. And as I said previously in my remarks, a number of other countries have looked at how they can promote financial integrity through their sandboxes as well. So where the AML or KYC requirements can be improved, or simply trying to understand the cybersecurity implications of what these companies want to do. So sandboxes are one method, but I would say that, again, to go back to my previous point, the benefit of simply engaging between the regulator and the companies has been one of the strongest benefits from these new regulatory approaches to fintech that we are seeing.
Thank you very much. As a moderator, you have a challenge in a way to stand between you and your lunch. Yeah? And as such, of course, in the interest of time, we have to somehow wrap up the discussion. But in order to do so, I would very much ask you, Artem, maybe to start, and we just go along. What do you think is the most important aspect of it to further innovation, and how you further innovation by legal means, by regulatory means, and in particular, maybe also you can share with us what the Russian Duma has already initiated as a pro-innovative measure. Of course, each of us has maybe 1 minute and a bit more for that, so just to keep in time.
So, essentially, I'll once again refer to the topic we mentioned, the topic of trust. Trust is the key concept here. If there is no trust, that no one would really use the technology the way it should be. So, on our part, it's all about ensuring information security, ensuring tech security, and providing stable foundation for finance.
Important aspect of it.
The way my experience with my colleagues at the central bank, the most important one is really, regulators are conservative by nature. The real openness and flexibility. I think these are critical. Otherwise, we go nowhere. That's all. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Pia.
I'll try to keep it just a short, 3 words, and let me use letter C's. Number 1 is to catalyze. I talked about our role as regulator in how we respond to innovation, but I think we also have a role to really enable regulation by doing things, by catalyzing the market. For example, how we're doing the retail payment system in the Philippines. Number 2 is capacity, and this was mentioned earlier. We need to develop our own internal capacities as regulators. In the BSP, we just we just established a FinTech sector, looking at all these initiatives and areas, and also exploring RegTech solutions. And the last one is coordinate. And this is, within regulators, for example, on virtual currencies, we need to coordinate with our Securities and Exchange Commission, for example, on ICOs, and also coordinating cross-border because of the very nature of the innovations we are seeing. So we have, for example, an MOU with the MAS on FinTech. So basically, we need to catalyze innovation, even as regulators, coordinate, and also capacitate ourselves.
Philip, what's your international perspective on this?
I think in this context of proportionality, it's good to bear in mind that regulation is there for a reason. Innovation is not a license to cut corners. Yes, we want to support and promote inclusive financial innovation, but we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. It's still important that companies are well capitalized, that they protect consumers, that they promote financial integrity. So I think that's my most important takeaway. And what I would like to leave people with is sort of thinking about what it is that the rationale for promoting innovation. Is it to promote financial inclusion? Is it to promote competition? Is it simply to understand the regulated markets that they supervise better? I think once you have that lens, it helps really frame the mindset and the culture of the organization about what you're trying to do, but also helps you keep in mind that proportionality of balancing financial innovation with the other objectives we've been talking about.
Anatoly, being in your country, you have the last word, and it's, of course, still an honor to be in Russia.
I don't really work in the Bank of Russia. It's the Bank of Russia who has organized this event, but still. Okay, I mostly work in the sphere of legal regulation of the digital economy. I get to meet a lot of people who work in this field, and I've come to a conclusion that 99% of these people are crazy, and there are many geniuses among them, and I'm just really glad that our country has so many talented, young, excited people who are able to drive amazing progress in various technologies in our country. And still, the risks that stem from these technologies and that they stem from the actions of these kind of crazy guys, especially for non-qualified investors, we should keep these risks in mind, and we should protect these investors from the crazy people and some very sane people, but sane people with criminal interests who want to launder some money using new technology, or maybe finance terrorism or some other malpractices. Therefore, we should always identify everyone of all the participants to prevent any malpractices in the market. Thank you.
To see that apparently skills and excitement either go hand in hand with a certain degree of craziness or crime. And this is my experience as a university teacher. I can just tell you that the most talented students are the most difficult to steer. In a way, that's a privilege of having PhD students, but also it's of course a challenge. Having said so, I think our panel has clearly outlined that the key aspect of balancing our three aspects of innovation, consumer protection, and integrity is talking to the people who innovate, because those people come up with ideas that no one else has ever seen before, and that means the regulator hasn't seen them before. And this is a definition of innovation, something new. And if something new is in front of the regulators, regulators also need time to adjust their approaches. The traditional approaches are good for what they have already seen, but when they see something new, they have to adjust the approaches, and that takes time. It's not about regulatory tardiness we're talking here about. It's about a sound approach, because the other side, who has innovated, had probably months, if not years, to think about the innovation. And so regulators will probably also need a certain degree of time to adjust the approaches. I think it's just fair here and not to over-demand what regulators can do. Because finally, if things go bad, it's the regulator's hat who's on the table. It's not the innovator, because the innovator will by long be bankrupt or in jail already. With that, maybe I want to close the discussion. I thank all my panelists for their insightful and inspired contributions, and I think we deserve our lunch now. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please also a round of applause for our moderator for this session. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now move to the breakout sessions, and I know that you're all familiar with the various halls, but just once again, innovations to close MSME credit gap is in the Grey Hall. Climate change and innovations for greening financial inclusion is in the White Hall. Enhancing regulatory processes through RegTech is in the Brown Hall. So please, the Brown Hall is just not too far from the main plenary room. So it's just the next corridor on your right. And the final hall, which is the Orange Hall, will have the innovative solutions for moving beyond correspondent banking relationships. So Grey Hall, White Hall, and Orange Hall is further down, and the Brown Hall, the corridor on your right, I think it's the next corridor to your right. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Please, it's an hour for the breakout session, and then you move straight for lunch. And please return for our plenary session after lunch, scheduled for 2:40. At 2:40, if we can be seated back here so we can get straight into the plenary session, because we still have a bit to go through before we conclude. Thank you.